You hear me? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started on our day 2 of our KUMC KPA Career Development Workshop. And I just want to introduce the KPA again. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Tyler Weaver. I'm currently the chair of the KPA. And so the KPA is really a organization to advocate for postdoctoral affairs at KUMC and really serve as a bridge between the postdocs and administration. And so a lot of what we do is career development workshops, such as the one you're at today. And so without further ado, I'm going to have Rebecca come up and introduce our sponsors.
Thank you so much, Tyler. We're so happy to have these wonderful sponsors, which made today possible. First up is the Center for Children's Healthy Lifestyles and Nutrition. They are a research group containing 59 different faculty members over 5 strategic areas and bring in a whole lot of grant money to the university. Their specific research groups include metabolism in special populations, fatty liver and obesity metabolism, multi-generational behavior change, and early nutrition and eating behaviors. So thank you to the folks at the Center for Children's Healthy Lifestyles and Nutrition. And our second sponsor is the KU Diabetes Institute, which was formed in 2007 with a mission to advance research leading toward the prevention and control of diabetes, as well as an eventual cure for the disease. Researchers and clinicians from the University of Kansas Medical Center and the University of Kansas Lawrence and the KU School of Medicine in Wichita form the core of this institute and are engaged in a wide range of basic science, translational, and clinical research projects centering around diabetes and its complications. So thank you to both those groups for our ability to put this event on. This is our first career development workshop. So we are asking for feedback from all of you. You can simply scan this QR code, which will take you to a Google form that you can fill out anonymously and help us improve this workshop for next year and for all of our future trainees. In addition, a couple of things. We are recording all of the sessions. We will upload those sessions to our sponsor's YouTube channel, so you can look for that. We will send that information out to everyone that's registered. So if you haven't registered and you want to get that, please get your name in the registration so that we can send that information out to you. We also have had a few speakers that have offered to share their slides, and so we'll be sending those out at the end of the workshop as well. Other than that, if you have questions and you are joining us virtually, you can drop them in the chat and we will facilitate making sure your question gets asked. Otherwise, if you're in the audience, we welcome any questions and we have a microphone to facilitate asking questions there. Whoops. First up, for our workshop for day 2, which is focused on industry and alt-ac careers, we have Dr. Nicole Betz, who is speaking about crafting effective non-academic resumes, how to identify and communicate your experiences and skills for a non-academic audience. Dr. Betz earned her PhD in cognitive psychology from Northeastern University in 2019, and then served as a postdoc in Yale psychology for 2 years before transitioning to a marketing research role in ad tech. Let me stop sharing. All right, Dr. Betz, you should be able to share your screen.
All right, can you see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
And then I believe you're muted.
Let's see, hold on. I'm not muted. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay, hold on. We're dealing with some technical. We cannot hear you in the room, but apparently on Zoom, everyone can. So give us just 1 second.
Sure. I'll just share my screen.
There we go. No problem.
Okay. So you can hear me. Oh, am I sharing the wrong screen?
Yes, we are seeing presenter view.
Sorry.
No
right.
problem.
I'll share this screen and then there we go. Now you can see it.
Awesome. Yep, that's all great. Thank you so much.
All right, great. So thank you so much for having me. So as mentioned, I'm just going to be talking today a little bit about crafting non-academic resumes. So a big part of this is just trying to identify and communicate your sort of academic experiences and skills for non-academic audiences. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about sort of background before you even start to craft your resume, and then we'll go into the resume, and I'm happy to share my slides as well. So the big message that I really want to communicate today is you have a lot of relevant skills and experiences if you're in academia, and these are skills and experiences that non-academic members will really value and actually need in their organizations, but you may or may not have to learn how to discuss these skills for a non-academic audience, because it's very different from how we learn to communicate about them in academia. So hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have a little bit more of a foundation for how to do this. So just a real quick intro to me. So I'm Nicole, I use she, they pronouns. I'm located in Massachusetts, so East Coast, USA. And I'm currently a marketing researcher in ad tech, which means that I do research for my company in order to sort of generate marketing interest. And ad tech is a type of technology industry that's focused on sort of how to deliver advertisements online in meaningful and useful places. I have a million hobbies, but I do not really like winter. So it's not my favorite time of year. So we've already sort of gone over this, but I just wanted to quickly overview my career trajectory. So my background, as mentioned, is in psychology, specifically cognitive psychology. So most of my research is related to that, like looking at how children in particular, and sometimes adults, learn about science. And so that's what I did at Northeastern for my PhD and also at Yale for my postdoc. And I've had 2 non-academic roles since then. I just transitioned out of academia about a year ago. So I had a part-time contract instructional designer role where I created online courses. And then I had my current role, which is the marketing researcher, which we already discussed. And so when I talk to current academics about making the leap outside of academia, I often get this question, which is, how do I convert my CV into a resume? But I actually think that this is not the best question to be asking, just because they're such different documents. So a CV kind of in general is kind of a list of everything that you've done that's relevant to academia, whereas a resume is just much more streamlined and tailored work experience dossier. So basically with a resume, you want to be able to show that you can really focus and highlight the skills that are relevant to that specific work environment. Whereas with a CV, you just put everything on there and let the reader kind of pick and choose what they think is relevant. So this is a little Venn diagram. I think you all know sort of what's in a CV, but it's like all of your publications, all of your presentations, courses. Sometimes you'll put like mentee names or service work, but not much of that is going to be included in a resume. So instead, a resume will have a lot of other content that you kind of have to generate from scratch and not really pull directly from a CV. So we'll go over this in more detail, but a resume is going to have probably a little professional summary of you, and again, a summary, short version of responsibilities and deliverables for each of the roles that you've had, a list of all of your relevant skills, technical skills and tools that you use. And again, this is going to be very tailored to the role. So this means that you want to figure out what kind of role you want to apply to before really start making your resume so that you can use the proper jargon so that you can pick the right experiences to include. So the stuff that's in both is really pretty basic, like your name, contact info, the dates, that your basic education overview, and maybe like a link to your website. So rather than thinking about how do I convert my CV to a resume, I think a better question to start with is just how do I craft a resume in my desired field? So what we're going to talk about for the rest of my talk today, and hopefully we'll leave some time for questions. We'll just briefly go over these first two steps, but I really think that these are important before you actually start drafting your resume. So first, find your path, figure out what kind of roles you want to apply for, what you're going to be targeting in that resume. And then step two is going to be identifying your relevant experiences and skills. And step three is going to be drafting your resume. So first, find your path. I'm just wondering, am I sharing the right screen? So it's got the wrong. Maybe I'll just share a smaller version of this. And then I'll be sure that I'm sharing the right screen. Okay, great. So first, identifying your path. So what non-academic roles are you interested in? So really to start off here, you're going to want to learn your options. So this means that you're going to want to tap into your network, do informational interviews, which is really where you chat with people in different roles that interest you and just learn about what they do and kind of talk casually about them. And also look on LinkedIn. It's a really great resource to learn about what different jobs are available. You can do things like search alumni from your university and even your program sometimes to see what kind of things they're doing in the world, or just kind of poke around LinkedIn and see what kind of roles are available maybe at companies that you like. And a big part of this is really just reflecting on what interests you and what motivates you. So these are some sort of broad types of roles that you might be interested in, just to give you sort of a starting point of how to carve up that space. So like research, data science, teaching, science communications, project or product management. And so for me, what I did was I identified two types of roles that I wanted to do, so either research or teaching. And then I kind of looked around the space at what other PhDs have done related to research or teaching, and I made these like long lists of different roles in each bucket that I might be interested in. And then I conducted informational interviews with all of them, and I actually did get that contracting role in teaching to kind of explore that initially. And that's when I realized, no, I want to do something more research focused. And then I started to apply for jobs with these titles. And that's kind of how I landed my current role. So that again is just a brief overview, but I think that hopefully some of the other speakers will talk a little bit more about how to identify what you want. And I'll give you some resources at the end of this talk as well for places that you can explore that as well. So now we move on to step two, which is identifying your relevant experiences and skills. So a big part of this is, again, just gathering sort of resources, learn about your target role, learn about the jargon that they use. Again, I really recommend using LinkedIn for this, even if you don't have a fully fleshed out profile on LinkedIn, which I think you should if you're looking at non-academic routes. You can use LinkedIn to find the profiles of the roles that interest you. And sometimes they'll post resumes, but if not, their LinkedIn pages are pretty close to what you would include on a resume as well. You can also pull job ads that interest you on LinkedIn, and then you can get more information about what those roles entail, as well as the jargon there. And there's this really cool feature called LinkedIn Learning. So you might have access to this through your university, but if not, you should be able to do at least 1 month free. And there are just a bunch of free online courses. If you have access to LinkedIn Learning, that you can explore to learn again more about the target roles and just get a better sense of how people in that space are talking about them. And then the next step is sort of just drawing a bunch of connections. So this is a lot of Googling. So based on what you learn from the LinkedIn or any other online resource exploration, just work backwards from the jargon. So you can look up the terminology and sort of analogize them to your own work experience, academic experience, wherever applicable. And this doesn't have to be a perfect match. So I think in academia, we maybe are more used to things being a perfect match and like paying attention to that nuance, but for this, close enough is definitely good enough here. So these are just a few examples of ways that you can kind of translate your skills into their jargon. So here I have the jargon on the left, and then what skills you might have on the right. So for example, you might have heard the term deliverables. I think I've used that in this talk already, but this is basically what your research produced. What is your output? So it might be things like manuscripts or presentations. If you're in a medical school, maybe there are more tangible, concrete, like medical related deliverables that you can focus on. And that's great. This is something that you really want to highlight in your resumes. You also have maybe heard stakeholders, and this is just basically anyone with a stake in your research. This could be co-authors, anybody that might be utilizing your research or deliverables, things like that. Project management. This is something that you may or may not have realized that you've been doing, but basically running your studies or supervising your student studies is project management. So you definitely already have this skill. And sometimes, at least in my field, we call desk research is just basically literature review or background research. Sometimes they'll just call that research. It depends on the field. But again, this is where you kind of have to pull the jargon from those job ads or from the individuals that you know in that role, see how they're talking about it and look it up to figure out what they mean in their space. There's also something in like user experience research called benchmarking studies, which I didn't realize that I had already been doing in academia, because this is basically just studies with a control group baseline, just getting an initial benchmark about where the data would be. So this is another example of something that you maybe didn't realize that you've done. And another big thing that people forget to include from academia is this term like end-to-end research. This is a really big thing in a lot of non-academic research fields. So it's not going to be immediately apparent to the audience that what you've done is end-to-end research, but it's basically just running a project from start to finish, from generating research questions to publication. So again, this is something that you should emphasize if you're looking at research roles. The other big thing that I want to emphasize here is that you also should consider what isn't relevant, because not all of your experiences will be, and that's okay. So when I look at initial drafts of resumes a lot, I'm calling them mistakes here. I don't know if they're like necessarily mistakes, but things that I often highlight in these initial drafts of resumes. So remember that resume should be really tailored to your role. So for example, if you're applying to a research role or a data science role, you can omit teaching experience unless it's very directly relevant. So maybe you're applying to a research role that will include a lot of teaching or mentoring newer researchers, and you've taught a research course or something like that. So again, just try to tailor the resume to the role that you're applying to. People also sometimes include service to department, which may or may not be useful for the role that you're applying to. So basically for every item, just ask yourself, like, is this actually relevant? Is this something that I really will need to include that demonstrates that I have the skills for this role? And if not, you can leave it off. And there's also, I see a lot of resumes that have just too much detail. So like a full publication list. There are some roles that you'll apply to that will want this, but not the kind of roles that I was applying to. So we can go over later how we can talk about this, but one strategy is just to report how many publications you've generated in a role, or maybe 1 or 2 examples of a publication, rather than putting everything, particularly if you've published a lot, that's a lot of real estate in your resume. And most of, or many of the maybe less relevant content probably could be reframed as relevant, but you probably have a lot of skills already. And I think that the bigger problem that I see with non-academic resumes is that they're including too much. So you probably don't have to sort of bend over backwards to make all of your experiences fit into a role. And another big thing that I recommend here, even before you start drafting your resume, is just taking stock of your deliverables. So think about different ways to describe your impact, and ideally quantitatively. So publications, presentations, non-science articles. Again, you can just provide a count for that. Like I have 12 publications, 20 oral presentations, something like that. That's a great deliverable. Maybe the number of courses you've taught or planned, or the number of students that you've taught, number of mentees. Again, these would be more relevant to more teaching focused roles. And you can also sort of hint at how much money you've secured in grant funding, or maybe the amount of money that a grant has that you've sort of run. So even if your PI earned a grant, you can say like, I ran a grant worth a certain amount of money. And if you don't feel comfortable reporting that actual dollar amount, this is one strategy you can use. So this just shows that it's like, it's a 5-digit grant without actually revealing how much money that is. So that's one strategy. And you may have a lot of other deliverables that I'm not aware of, but it's just useful to take stock of these, because this is what you really want to highlight as much as possible in your resume, because the non-academic roles really just want to see that you are doing tangible, concrete, measurable things. This is huge in a lot of non-academic fields. All right, so now we're on to step 3, which is actually drafting your resume. And I guess one caveat that I have here is just, there's going to be exceptions to everything that I say. So one thing I'll really emphasize here is just pulling from examples of other resumes. So if you see like 5 out of 5 resume examples that you've seen violate one of these sort of rules that I'm going to communicate, then you can violate that rule too. I'm just sort of providing information that I think is generally applicable, and there's always going to be exceptions. All right, so just a basic introduction to resumes. So I think of resumes as sort of like a little advertisement of your work experience, skills, ability, and education. So this really answers the question, why is this applicant a good fit for the role? So this is basically a tool to get you an interview. So that sort of means that it doesn't, I guess both of these sort of mean that it doesn't have to include everything, right? You can kind of hint or pique interest with the content that you have on your resume. And then that will give you more things to talk about during the interview itself as well. The resumes are usually 1 to 2 pages. Depends on the role. Some people will be like hard and fast 1 page. I usually recommend 2 pages for academics, again, because we're kind of used to longer forms. And so it's just a little bit easier of an initial target to shoot for 2 pages. And then there's this applicant tracking software that happens quite a bit. So your resume might get triaged by just like an algorithm. So if it's not getting triaged by an algorithm, it's kind of just scanning your document for keywords. There's probably about like a 6-second rule for this triage. Like a human person might be looking at it for about 6 seconds before making their decision about whether you'll be triaged or whether you'll go into the interview phase. Again, this is more applicable to bigger companies. If you're applying to like a very small startup, then they might spend more time on your resume. But generally speaking, you want to prepare your resume as if it's going to be just like a quick glance, and then they'll make the decision about whether that or not they want to proceed. So you really want your resume to be quite scannable. And so that means a little bit more like white space, bolding, headings, like a clear organizational framework. You want it to include keywords. So this could be jargon that's common in the role that you're targeting, in the other resumes, or in the job ad itself. And this is a big thing too, that you want it to be a correct document format. So there are certain formats that are not as easy to scan as others. So I would just look up wherever you're applying the document you're applying to. So like Indeed versus LinkedIn versus just if you're emailing it to someone or something, you can look up what kind of documents are the best for that website. Because like if you put your resume, for example, in a PDF, it might not go through the applicant tracking software. So you just have to kind of be careful to match the document format to the place where you're submitting it to. And this is a little bit, it could be tricky. But you can always ask if you're not sure what document format is best. All right, so now we're going to go into a little bit an anatomy of resume. So this is my current resume. I'm not applying for jobs right now, so it's not in perfect form, but it could give you a sense of the different elements of it. So basically, the anatomy of the resume, it starts with like a header with your name at the top, and then your current or target role. So if you're going for a research role and your current title is like postdoctoral researcher, you might want to add something like mixed methods researcher or qualitative researcher or something, just to give a little bit more information, because in the non-AC world, they might not really know what a postdoctoral researcher is. And then kind of just like with a CV, you'll have your contact information, but you'll also probably want to put your LinkedIn link, particularly like if you have a fleshed out LinkedIn, just so that they can take a look at your LinkedIn page for more information. I also tried to make mine a little bit pretty and designy, and that was in part because I was applying for user experience roles as well when I got my current marketing researcher role. So it seemed to make more sense to me to have something a little bit more like UX and designy. And then you'll also have the sort of bread and butter of your resume is your work experience. So you want to organize this by institute, and put like the dates you're working, the location, and bullet points describing your work responsibilities. They usually say like 4 bullet points per work experience. I have 5 here, but again, it's not like a final version. This is just me updating it with my current skills. But I want to highlight here that I'm trying to emphasize deliverables. Like I have 4 end-to-end novel research projects that I've delivered so far. And then here I'm trying to use more sort of action words with crafted narratives. And then here I'm talking about a little bit of jargon, like with the internal stakeholders, just to try to, translate, I guess, my experience into terms that are more immediately understandable. One unique thing about the resume compared to the CV is that you'll have like this succinct summary of what you do, sort of what you stand for. And yeah, this is where you can really show that you're focused and that your background is related to the job that you're applying to. And then you'll also have a list of relevant technical skills. This is like the end of the second page of my resume. So again, I have some bullet points for each of the work experiences that I have. And over here, after I go through all of my skills, I also emphasize my deliverables again here in this sort of pull-out format. So this is how I talked about my scientific manuscripts, just account 12 papers. And I also wrote that I have 6 more in development. Maybe I'll remove that if I'm applying for another job, but maybe I'll keep it, I don't know. And again, counted just for oral presentations. And then I very briefly talked about my education down here. I probably don't need to include the master's, but just space-wise, it made more sense in this format. But you could probably just put PhD. You maybe don't even need the undergrad degree here. But I put it kind of in the bottom, in the corner. I already have in the top that I have a PhD, so they know that. But they don't really need to. They don't care probably as much about where I got my degree or when necessarily. So it's down here in the corner. And before you start crafting your resume, I mean, you can pull from my example as well, but you really just want to find a template and examples for the roles that you're applying to. So here are some places where you might be able to find resume templates, like word processing software sometimes have one. When you just open up like Microsoft Word, you can find an example. Microsoft Office website also has one, so there's a link here. And there's a lot of online websites that have templates like Canva, free resume templates, Indeed. So there's a lot of options. Just kind of scroll through and find a format that you like, and then you can just start inserting your content there. And then in addition to the templates, you want to grab those samples for the jobs that you're applying to as well. So sometimes you can pull them on LinkedIn if they have their actual resume, or just look at the content that they're putting in their LinkedIn profiles, how they're describing their jobs and their work experience. And you can also ask your network if you know of anybody who has a job that you are interested in, ask them for a resume. And the biggest thing I think with your resume, your non-ACC resume, is really just trying to emphasize results, emphasize deliverables, show that you are impactful. In the non-ACC world, this is huge. You want to really prove that you are effective, that you create useful content, and that you can describe it in a quantitative way. So a lot of, again, the academic work that we might do is maybe more basic science, like we're advancing the theory of something, but that's not a deliverable that they might care about as much. So concrete deliverables are really the bread and butter. So incorporate into your work experience bullets, quantify everything that you possibly can. And also you can incorporate it into its own section if it's relevant, like how I did with the scientific manuscripts, or in your overview summary section. So there's a lot of ways that you can really highlight how effective you are. And then just real quick, you want to also summarize your technical skills. So highlight things like what skills, techniques, tools might be relevant to your role that you have. You want to include things if you're in a research role, for example, like research skills. So this is my full list. So I've got like qualitative research skills, quantitative research skills, hypothesis testing, data collection, data analysis, other research skills. And then there's also maybe more general skills that you might find useful in your role, things like communication, engaging presentations, linear storytelling, or any sort of management. So again, you're just kind of pulling out different skills that you might have that will be useful to the role. And you can figure this out based on what other people include in their resumes or in that like skills section that they have on their LinkedIn profile. And I think it's great to categorize and organize this with headers because, again, it's just more scannable maybe the role isn't as interested in qualitative research. They can just ignore this whole section rather than kind of digging through everything. And then a big thing here, again, which I found for academics, is just to try to simplify and streamline. So this I've done, for example, through a lot of revision and trying to practice concision. So details are not always helpful, and not everything needs to be included. I think I've said this like 5 times, but it's really important. So for every item on your resume or that you're thinking of including on your resume, you just want to ask yourself, does it relate to the role I want? Is this redundant maybe with other content that we have here? Can I say this more succinctly? And basically do this until you get to about 1 to 2 pages and about 4 bullets per work experience. And then you have a first draft, and that's great. And you can keep on revising your content moving forward. So I basically revised and tried to look for concision opportunities every time I applied for a new role, because this document is so short. It's not like an academic CV that you have to go through pages and pages of content. So it's pretty easy to just do a quick pass before you upload. And this is an example of how much I've kind of simplified and streamlined content. So this is an item that I had on my CV. So under like the service to the university section, this description of a pronoun and inclusivity workshop that I did, there's like 3 full lines of content, as well as like, this is so many words. It's a lot of content. And I'm not applying for anything that's to do with like pronouns or inclusivity or the LGBTQ community. So it wasn't necessary to have all of these details. And the way that I report it in my actual resume right now is just 3 words: professional development workshop under skills. So that's it. So there's a lot of ways that you can really simplify and streamline. The other thing that I want to point out before we dive into just sort of a little workshop for the last few minutes is this curse of academic knowledge. So we're very used to talking to other academics about our work, but that's not how we want to talk about it to a non-academic audience. It's not how we want to talk about it on our resume. So basically, when you're drafting your resume, just try to describe your experience in a way that non-academics would understand. So I like to think of like my mom. If I were trying to explain what I'm doing to her, how would I do that? And that's kind of along the lines of how I would put it in my resume as well. So here's some just like examples that I've seen from resumes that I've looked at, things that you could probably avoid because they're just not useful or meaningful outside of academia. So things like first authorship, like they don't know what that means. They don't know how important it is to us in academia. So you don't have to say something like, I have 10 first author publications and 2 second author, like they don't care about that distinction. You can just collapse and say like, I have 12 publications. There's also journal tiers. So it is a huge big deal in academia if we were to get published in a top tier journal, and we would probably want to like shout it from the rooftops, but they probably don't know that much about these top journals. Like, so saying like, I got published in Nature, like maybe not useful information for them. If you want to really emphasize, maybe for a science communication job, for example, that you have really big, high impact work, you can just like say that exactly. So like publish work in a top tier journal or something like that. And that would communicate more than the journal itself. Abbreviations, jargon is a big thing as well. We use a lot of abbreviations in academia, but they might not know what those abbreviations mean or the jargon that we're using. So again, just kind of simplify and put things in more lay terms. And you can use the sample resumes or LinkedIn pages to figure out like what kind of jargon is or isn't common there. You also don't really need to put like your lab name or mentor name. They don't know what that lab is. And And then in terms of like mentor name, you want the resume to focus on you. So yes, it's important that you worked with this person, but it's not something that needs to be communicated in a resume. Societal memberships, you can remove that as well. And then there's some like awards and fellowships that you can probably leave off, things like Dean's List, and sometimes GPA as well. I mean, this is maybe more up to you or subjective, but these are some things that you probably don't need to do. Okay, so for the next few minutes, I've had some very brave volunteers provide me with some examples of the non-academic resumes that they've been kind of starting to work on. And so I'm going to just kind of go through them and just provide some feedback. And this is feedback that I think is very common to the initial resumes that I get. These are very common sort of formats. So it's not about you. If you gave me this resume, I really appreciate it. And these are sort of the similar feedback that I would give to other people on their resumes as well. Okay, so I tried to anonymize this as well. So hopefully that works. So basically, we're not seeing my animations here. So it looks like a lot at once. But basically, I tried to go through at first and like from the education section, just cut some information that you maybe don't need or that is redundant. So for example, GPAs, you probably don't need that. And then this one says like secondary education certificate. So I've crossed that out just because there's a secondary education certificate down here already under licensure. In terms of like this content too, I would only add it if you're applying to like teaching focused roles because, or maybe to a company that's education focused, because otherwise it's not like particularly relevant. So you don't need to include it. In terms of the header as well, so I would put your desired role and or your current role in your header, sort of like what I did in my sample resume. And also you want to add your LinkedIn link as well up here. They also reported their research experience. So this one's going in chronological order, but I would reverse it so that you have the most recent one at the top. And then I also would recommend, I think that this one, oh no, that's a different, I'm thinking of the other resume, sorry. Yeah, so I would put this in reverse chronological order. So I like how there's just like a couple of bullet points on each of these. But for some of these, you can probably try to simplify them a little bit more. Like this one, use siRNA to knock down collagen 11A1 expression in HN5 cells and performed. Like this is very technical. So I would only include this level of technical detail if it's something that that company or role like really would know about. So if you're applying to, for example, my company, they would have no idea what this is. If you're applying to like a biotech company and maybe doing a more technical sort of maybe a bench work focused role, maybe this would be more relevant, but try to think if there's a way for this kind of content to be simplified a little bit more in like more lay terms. And then this person also put all of the research presentations here. And I think this could all just be consolidated kind of, as I said before, into account, just like 13 oral research presentations. You can add more detail if you want. I didn't really go through all of these, but you can say like national or international research presentations at scientific conferences, something like that. But again, just kind of like collapse and summarize a little bit more. The length here of the resume, I think is pretty good. So 2 pages, but what I would do is probably, you can save a lot of space here, and then you can put more sort of deliverables here, maybe more quantitative information in them. And again, just try to tailor it for the role that you're interested in. They also had this content in their resume. So here they talk about like their membership and professional honors. You can probably get rid of this content, especially the memberships. You don't need that. The professional honors, you can kind of go through one by one to see, again, is it relevant to the role? And And then here is like a separate section for positions, but it's kind of, I think, maybe redundant with this content. I'm not really, I'm struggling, I guess, to follow that. So what I would do is only list the positions if they're relevant. So you can probably get rid of like the instructor and tutor role if you're not applying to a teaching focused position, and maybe just omit these if they're not as relevant. So, and then if you are going to report any positions that you've held, just make sure that you have the space to dig into what you did in these roles and maybe have like 2 to 4 bullets for all of them. And then they also had the teaching experience at the end of the doc here, which is, again, I would only include that if you want a teaching focused role. And the other comment I had on this is that it needs some sort of section to report the technical skills. So that's just some feedback on one workshop, one of the resumes. I have another one we can maybe go through real quick, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So I'll just kind of go through this a little bit quickly, try to not be redundant. So this is another brave soul who provided their resume. For this one, the length was 4 pages. So as we talked about, we want to cut that down to maybe like 1 to 2 pages. And there's a lot of extra space here. You could probably consolidate quite a bit. So one thing here, we've talked about, like, you don't need to mention your resume, your mentor, and you also want to, you don't necessarily need to be self-referent, like rather than saying like I work, you could just say like worked on this project, right? Because it just saves space, and it should be implied that you're talking about yourself, because like the resume is focused on you. We've already talked about trying to rephrase things with more lay terminology, focus on you. And then, so here we have the fellowships. And again, you can maybe remove some of these, like maybe this commemorative award, or maybe the dean's, I would probably do the dean's fellowship. I would just go through these a little bit more with whatever role in mind. In terms of any grants that you've earned, as I mentioned earlier, you can report the actual dollar amount secured in grant funding if it's an impressive amount, or you can just do it in this sort of X's format, so that it's a little bit more anonymous and private, but it shows a deliverable that you have that's very, very impactful. Just going to, let's see. Yeah, I think I've already talked about this stuff. So before we get into questions, just like some quick formatting tips. So you want to keep it simple and consistent. You want there to be a lot of also white spaces for visual breaks. So this is just like a screenshot from a resume template, and you can see all of this white space in here. It's very aesthetic to have that. It makes it more scannable. It makes it less complicated. You want to shoot for balance and alignment, and you can do like a pretty resume type of thing. So I did a little pop of color and like designy things. You can maybe include like icons or logos if you like that. And this could also vary based on the role that you want. So if you're interested in like a user experience role, maybe having these pretty elements would be more relevant. I also am amused by some of these like creative design elements, like this one. They have rated their skills on these like 5-point systems. So like excellent, very good. So those are some ways that you can get creative with it. And general tips, always check grammar and spelling. Specific content is better than general content. So this, I think, also points to highlighting concrete information, quantifying the content. Most recent experience should be first at the top of the resume. And then in terms of like the bullet points under the work experience or how you're listing the skills, put the most important content first. Use active voice. You can avoid like the first person reference. And again, concrete details are huge. So again, what I just really hope that you take away from this is that you have a lot of relevant skills and experience, and possibly too much because you might have to like pare down a little bit, and that's fine. But I hope that this has given you some foundational knowledge on how to communicate them. And then again, I can send out these slides, but here's some resources for resume tips. And now we can open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Betz. That was incredibly informative and really helpful. We have one question in the chat that I will read off for you. And then if we have additional questions in the audience, we can turn to those. So we have Tyler Weaver asking, do you recommend using any tools or templates that help with resume design and making the resume look, quote, prettier?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend using any tools or templates that you can find, because they really, they can just help you start from a pre-existing format that you find aesthetic. You don't have to worry as much about aligning things yourself. It just makes things a lot easier on you. I don't have any like ones that I'm particularly passionate about, I suppose, but there are some options here. Where is it? I put it somewhere. Yeah, I have some options in here somewhere. So there's like Canva, there's all sorts of, there it is. Canva, free resume templates, Indeed, even Microsoft Office. So you can look through all of these different template ideas. I also, in the resources slide, put a few options, I think, that have resume templates as well. So my Twitter friend, for example, oh no, this is not it. So my Twitter friend, Science Latte, she also has some great resume tips and templates as well. So you can go to her website, sciencelatte.com, and check out those resumes as well. In terms of like making the resume look prettier, I think that's, it's somewhat debated. Like some places will really like it, some places will not. So it's maybe a little bit of a risk. I think that it makes sense for certain jobs more than others. So again, like a user experience researcher kind of role, or any role at like maybe a company that is a little bit more modern, a little bit more like interested in aesthetics. If you look at their website and it looks a little bit more designy, you can make that choice. I tried to do something in the middle. Like I have some color on my resume, but it's not anything too dramatic. I know of other people who have just like only text, no color, and that works too. So I think it's just like a personal preference thing.
Thank you so much. As more, hopefully more of you add your questions to the chat, I thought I would ask, how do you go about tailoring your resumes? Do you have like a central document that has everything listed out and then you just pick and choose what fits for that position? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think for me, I have different documents for different types of roles. And then, so I had one that was more focused on qualitative, for example, research, and one that was focused more on quantitative for my initial one. So basically, I started out with a longer form resume that just had too much content. And then I kind of separated it out a little bit more. So one was like more qualitative focused and one was more quantitative focused. And then when I was applying, I could tailor to each job. So if I saw a job that's like specifically mentioned qualitative research in the resume, or in the job ad, I then would choose the qualitative version of my resume and take a look at their job ad, take a look at their company website, and kind of just like sprinkle in the keywords and jargons that they talk about a lot, and try to just make my resume more tailored for that specific job role. It's sort of similar to how I applied to academic roles as well, actually. So just like background research on the roles that I really liked and sprinkle in those keywords, any sort of like big goals that they or objectives that the company has that I could draw connections to.
And it seems those keywords are vital in getting your resume seen and getting to potentially that next step. Is it to the point that even just adding one or two of them pushes your resume from getting the interview to not, like the rest of the content could be the same, it's just those keywords?
It could definitely be because as I mentioned earlier, there's like triage phases. So a lot of companies that get a ton of resumes will just like put all their resumes through these like automatic tracking software programs, and they'll specifically be looking for keywords. So you might get triaged out if you don't include those keywords. If you're applying to like a smaller company, that's less likely to happen. But if you're applying to something like Google or like Meta, any of those like big companies, it's very likely that not having those keywords will just mean that your resume is not even going to be seen.
Thank you. I have an additional question for you. So as a academic, I'm a postdoc right now. Is it, what would you recommend? And obviously there would be, there's probably multiple ways to go about it. Let's say I had an experience a long time ago that fit in with this role I'm applying for. Do I go that far back in time and report that? Or would you recommend instead figuring out how I can make what I've done more recently applicable?
Yeah, I think it depends on how relevant your more recent skills are. So for example, for this like marketing research role, if I had a marketing focused position during like undergrad, I would have definitely included that because I don't have anything else related to marketing on my resume. Everything else is very similar in research. So I would probably have sacrificed some content like I have on my next page, where am I? Like this laboratory coordinator job. Like I have 3 other researcher roles. I don't need to also have this laboratory coordinator. So even if this were more recent, I would have replaced it with the marketing researcher. So it's, I think, based on how relevant the other more recent experiences are and how novel that earlier experience is in terms of showing that you have at least some background that's relevant to this role.
Thank you so much for that. Any other questions from our audience? Oh, yep. Hold on one second.
Hi, my name is Vikram, and I'm a senior scientist here. You mentioned that big companies, they have software that can just scan your document in 6 seconds and decide what is going to happen. Is there any online software where we can just copy paste the requirements from the job, and the other window, we can just upload our resume and get the outcome? Like, how fit are we?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. I do know that there are some companies that you can sort of hire to do that for you. But I don't know if there probably is. I just am not aware of one that will show you the outcome. So yeah, I can definitely look into that though. And like, I'll send out these slides. So if I find it, I'll add it to resources for you.
Awesome. We have someone in the audience that has an idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm part of this like recruiting thing right now, and they suggest that we copy and paste the skills and requirements to this online word cloud, and it'll like really highlight the keywords that are popping up for the position you're interested in. And then those keywords are ones that are going to be in the tracking systems that people, when you upload your resume, those are the keywords that they're going to find. So I've been copying and pasting like 10 to 15 job postings for the same position to see what they all have in common. as far as
Mhm.
keywords. And then those are really relevant to like what they are putting in their tracking systems. So I
Yeah.
found that really helpful. It's like a word cloud if you just Google that, and then you can literally copy and paste every like 15 job postings to see what they have in common.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I believe we are just about at time. So if you all will please join me in thanking Dr. Betz. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. And everyone can look forward to receiving your slides. So thank you for that and the recording of the presentation. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.